this 180th session of the Northern Illinois Annual Conference. We also want to take this opportunity to thank our host churches and their pastors, our Redeemers and our Saviors United Methodist Churches and their pastors, Reverends Ramir Esquera and David Lagos Fonseca, for welcoming us to Schaumburg. Friends, I hope this venue is a welcome change for all who had been telling us through your evaluations that it was time to move to a different place. However, we all know change is hard, right? So there might be some things that we still need to work on. But this is our first year here, and we will learn from this experience. Your annual conference committee will keep working hard to make the transition as smooth as we can. Amidst the change, the plenaries will feel the same, if not a little busier, since we have legislation to discuss, decisions to make for our annual conference, and delegates to elect for the general and jurisdictional conferences. And we're also taking pictures for the conference photo directory, so don't forget to get your picture taken during breaks. They're right outside these doors, but during breaks. A few more things that are worth our attention here. Our displays and Cokesbury are immediately behind the stage in Discovery Room. I hope you will take time to visit the displays and discover ministries that your church might be interested in. As in the past several years, our accessibility coordinators are available for any accessibility questions or concerns. They will be at table 5 in the discovery area. Like Bishop said, there are 4 voting devices at your table. You will share them with clergy and laity. We will share them with each other. We will learn the gift and the art of sharing. As our bishop calls us, laity and clergy will alternate using those devices. You will get more instructions on that, so don't worry. But speaking of elections, please remember that there should be no distribution of campaign material inside this room. Everything happens outside these doors because the ushers are keeping an eye on us, and if we see anything being distributed in-house, they will remove it. So let's be careful and do all the campaigning we want to do outside the doors. If you have not already found, you see those big restroom signs on either end of this building, of this room. That's where the restrooms are. Outside these doors, to the right, before you turn right in the hallway, is a family restroom that will be all gender restroom for us, and there is one by the escalators also. The worship team has worked hard. The Sankofa image that you see over there is a mythical bird from Ghana. We heard we saw a video on it yesterday, and if you go to the book, the bishop's letter describes it a little bit more in detail. Wi-Fi information is all available. It's the Renaissance_conference, and the password is UMC Group 19. The book that you received when you registered is also a helpful tool. A lot of questions that you may have, you might find answers in that book. But if there are still questions that you may have, the staff and the volunteers are always willing to help. All right, now let us organize so we can begin some adventure in this adventure hall and make decisions that move us forward as a church. So, Bishop, I move that the agenda for this session of the annual conference be the agenda printed in the booklet we received at registration.
All right, and this comes to us from the annual conference committee. Any question? All those in favor of making this the agenda say yes. Yes. Those who would not say no, but it still prevails.
Bishop, I move that the registration list be the roll call for this session of annual conference.
All right, properly before us. All those in favor, please say yes. Yes. And opposed, no. And it prevails.
Bishop, I move that the standing rules as printed in the 2018 Northern Illinois Conference Journal be the standing rules for this session of annual conference.
All right, our standing rules. All of those in favor, please say yes. Yes. Those opposed, say no. And it prevails.
Bishop, I move that the members of the Conference Council on Finance and Administration, the Conference Board of Trustees who are not already members of the annual conference, our conference staff, persons who are here in relationship to the documents before us, and all other persons certified by the Credentials Committee who are otherwise not voting members, be seated within the voting bar of the conference and be given the right of voice for this session of annual conference.
All right. All those in favor, please say yes. Yes. And opposed, no. And it prevails.
Then, Bishop, I move that the Adventure Hall be the plenary floor for this session of annual conference, including the platform on which we currently are, but excluding the seating in this space that is designated for guests and visitors.
All right, setting of the bar. All those in favor, please say yes. Yes. And opposed, no. And it prevails.
And Bishop, finally, I move that the plenary we just described and voted be the voting bar for our conference.
All right. All those in favor, please say yes. Yes. And opposed, no. And it prevails.
And Bishop, that concludes the organizing motions for this session.
All right, thank you. Then I will call on Katie Voigt to present the consent calendar.
Good morning, Bishop.
Good morning.
Good morning, annual conference. My name is Katie Voigt. I am clergy from the DeKalb District serving at Erie, and I am honored to be here as your chair of daily proceedings. In our time together this morning, we are going to start with the consent calendar that was available online as of 11:30 a.m. on May 1st. A consent calendar helps us to proceed through our work more quickly and efficiently because one vote will be for all the items on the consent calendar. According to the standing rules you see printed on the preliminary consent calendar that hopefully you have all already downloaded, your consent calendar committee met and put together the consent calendar that you found online. There are two categories to the consent calendar, one for approval and one for non-approval. When we take our vote in just a few moments, your vote is in essence agreement with the consent calendar, either for approval or non-approval. We will take one vote for both consent calendars together, so an in favor vote will approve all the legislation on the consent calendar for approval and will not approve all the legislation on the consent calendar for non-approval. An opposed vote would mean that you disagree with the recommendation of the consent calendars. We want to continue to stay clear about why the committee made the decisions that we did. So again, this year you found reasons that items were placed onto the different categories of the consent calendar. We hope this was helpful and works toward the goal of helping us all understand the work we do. Since publishing the consent calendar, I've heard from one author asking to pull the document from consideration. So, document 700.11, affirming our theological task, has been removed from our consideration and thus also from the consent calendar.
All right, the consent calendar is properly before you. I think Katie did a good job of trying to explain that we're going to have one vote, which will then approve and disapprove of those on the consent calendar. So, any questions? Yes, over here.
Is it possible to remove other items from the consent
All right, so the question was, is it possible to remove other items from the consent calendar? Katie?
The form to remove something from the consent calendar was available online at the same time that the consent calendar was made available and was due yesterday at 3 p.m. I received paperwork to remove nothing from the consent calendar.
So according to our rules, this is what our consent calendar is. Yes? Okay, it's my understanding that they were available, maybe not exactly where you saw them. At this point, this is our consent calendar. All right, so it's properly before us. Those who, yes? You know, if we need a mic. Yeah, it's a bit of a accessibility issue here. So the mic is coming to you. Thank you.
If we didn't see it online, that leaves us completely wiped out of the possibility of doing this, of removing another item. I would ask us if we could use the 25 vote things as a hand vote for removing items.
Yeah, okay. But first you have to vote to suspend the rules.
I would move to suspend the rules
Okay.
to do that.
Is there a second to suspend the rules? All right. So let's do the suspension of the rules, which then would allow for us to take a hand count to see if 25 of you want to remove a specific piece of legislation from the consent calendar. Those who would, and this takes a 2/3 vote, those who would suspend the rules, please raise your hands. Thank you. Those who would not? And I'm sorry, but it wasn't 2/3. So the consent calendar is properly before us. All those who would accept the consent calendar, please say yes. Yes. Those who would not, please say no.
No.
And we registered that, and it is approved.
Bishop, within that consent calendar were 4 documents that closed churches. So can we turn to one of our district superintendents to pray for Elmwood Park United Methodist Church, New Hope United Methodist Church of Chicago, Pilgrimage Protestant Church, and Trinity United Methodist Church of Lindenhurst.
Thank you. Whoops. They'll come, if you need a microphone, they'll come and bring you one to this table over here. That was just scary. Yes, Reverend Darnether Murph-Heath will pray. And she's going to microphone 2.
Let us be in an attitude of prayer. For the churches that were mentioned, for the districts of those churches, for the pastors of those churches, for the congregations that have served so mightily and faithfully in this Northern Illinois Conference. Oh God, we ask for your blessings upon each and every one of them. For the faithful ministries that have endured down through the years, we ask that you would continue to bless them and remember them. For the pastors that have served those churches down through the years, we ask that you would continue to remember them and bless them. For the hearts that are sad because of the closing of churches, we ask that you would mend those hearts. And we ask that those people would move from one church to another to continue to faithfully serve your holy name. We give you praise for the life and legacy of pastors, churches, and members. And we ask that you would hold them in the palm of your hand. Allow your love to sink down deeply into the hearts, that they will not look at this as failure, but that they would see your glory even in the midst of this. We give you praise, O God, for calling these churches into being. And we ask that their legacy lives on in our minds, our hearts, and our spirits. And you continue to hold them in the vault of heaven. We give you praise. We ask these things in the mighty, matchless, and merciful name of Jesus the Christ. And let every heart present say, amen.
Amen.
Thank you. We do remember these churches and their witness throughout the years. Yes. Microphone 4.
I read through those petitions, and on a couple of
Your
them...
name, please.
Doug Asbury, retired clergy.
Thank you.
On a couple of them, it indicated where the membership was transferred to, but on several of them, it had no indication that the membership was transferred to another church, and I'm just curious whether they were transferred or what the situation was with those where it wasn't mentioned.
Yes. Microphone... I can't see it. It must be 2. I'll get used to them.
Brittany Isaac, superintendent for Chicago Northwestern, where 2 of the churches are out of my district. And Doug, that's a great question. Most of the folks at least in my district, they are all going to one church. They're deciding, some are going to St. John, some are going to Park Ridge First. And so we didn't want to write the legislation to limit that.
All right, thank you. All right. Katie, I think we're ready for the historical reports.
The historical reports were available online as of May 1st as well. A separate download from the legislation, but also available in that same location. I move approval of the historical reports.
All right, they're properly before us. All those who will approve the historical reports and maybe even read them, please say yes. Those who would not approve them and probably won't read them, please say no. Yep, all right. And they are approved.
Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you. The BBC report would come forward. This is not the British Broadcasting Company, as you probably thought, but our beloved community report. So if you would come forward to give your initial reporting.
I'm Catherine Paisley, but let me start out saying good morning, annual conference. We're pleased to be with you to share some things about what is happening in our conference. We are a part of the Committee on Religion and Race, which for those of you who may be new to the annual conference session, is the committee that is working on justice and a celebration of diversity in the conference. We feel that diversity is an asset, and as we work for justice, we realize the reality that we do not exist on a level playing field. We need to use our positions of privilege on behalf of others so that we can raise each other up, much in the pattern of Jesus. We are the body of Christ, and as one body, we need to nurture the parts of the body that have been injured in order to heal so that we can be whole and effective and show the world what the body of Christ looks like when it's really whole and beloved. We have a task to do. God has called us to be about this task, and we are thankful for all of you and your work with us on this.
Hello, I'm Nadia Kanhai, co-chair of Religion and Race, your conference, Religion and Race, and we are partnering with a campaign from GCOR, the General Commission, inviting you to foster just love in order to make this, to build this beloved community and make central God's love, justice, equity, and inclusion in our denomination's lawmaking processes for the 2020 general and jurisdictional conferences. Part of what this campaign includes is electing and supporting full participation of delegates who are under 30, people of color, women, members of the LGBTQIA community, and delegates who have otherwise previously been marginalized because of economic or social location. We are inviting boldness from church leaders, that's all of us here, with regard to calling out and countering hate speech, supremacy rhetoric, might makes right theology, and us versus and us and them pronouns during our annual conference session. And we call on this body to pray with our feet and our hands, working, learning, challenging, and ministering, marching and witnessing in the pursuit of God's love, justice, peace, and reconciliation as we build this beloved community. We will have more information at our Commission on Religion and Race table next door, including Just Love buttons that call out racism, sexism, homophobia, and ableism, and instead call us to just love as we consider legislation and voting during the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And all right, this is, now we're going to have the training on the voting machine. Robert Motorhack, are you doing it? Come on down. All right, make sure, are you doing it? Who's doing it? All right, you should make sure you have, yes, you have a problem with your machines? Somebody please bring him a microphone. From microphone 3, would somebody please bring a microphone down front? You should have 4 of these machines at your table.
Fred Birchtold, retired clergy. In many of these pieces of legislation, there's the initials LGBT, and I sort of know what those are. And now they've added an IA on the end of it. Is there some place that could be printed out, what those initials stand for, and that distributed so that we all know what those mean?
Okay, I'll have somebody take that into consideration. All right, who is doing the explanation of these voting devices? I know just enough to be scary. This is a voting device. There should be 4 at your table. Is somebody doing it? There should be 4 at your table. You're going to share. Well, why don't you, okay, I'll read the PowerPoint. I just want us to be able to vote. All right, this is your voting device. Be very careful. As I said before, do not clutch it to yourself. This is not your personal device. You will share it, laity and clergy. You should have 4 or the same number of one of those groups. If you do not have the proper number, now would be the time to frantically wave. So to vote, you need to always know the number that has been assigned to the person you're voting for. You need to have those numbers readily before you. I think there's some frantic waving over here. Thank you. So you need to, even now, you need to make sure that you know that who the 3 people you're going to vote for will be. So make sure you have those numbers, and you have to, I'm pretty sure, turn this thing on. I'm not really sure how you do that. Oh, you don't have to turn it on. You don't, this is working. You don't have to turn it on, it is on, okay? So be very careful with it, so you're not just mindlessly putting numbers in. So what you want to do is put in the number of the person that you're voting for. So you would type in that number, and then you press OK. That's going to seal your number in. That's going to seal your number in. And you're going to vote. I'm going to lead you through vote for 1, press OK, vote for 2, press OK, vote for 3, press OK, and hopefully you will stop at that point. Do you have a question right now? I've already confused you. Microphone 4.
At table 85, there are 5 clergy persons and 2 lay persons. What do we do with only 4 devices? Some of us are from Chicago, and we could vote multiple times.
Yeah. You are the people we are so afraid of. First of all, I would look around your table. Do all of you really belong at table 85? Table 85? Okay, then they probably need one more device. All right. So, then, okay, over here, way over there, microphone 5. Do you have, microphone 5, Jay?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, none of our devices turn on at our table. We cannot enter any numbers on them.
It's not activated yet. Right? Is that right?
That is
right.
Yes,
otherwise,
correct.
you know, you'd be practicing and putting in all kinds of weird things. Okay, it will be turned on. Okay. All right, we have a little bit of a problem. And I think, okay.
Yeah, yes, good morning.
Yeah,
if you,
he's probably really ready to give instructions.
If you vote now, it won't actually be the actual base station is not turned on yet. So if you press a number now, it won't work because we didn't start the polling yet. So once you start polling, and if you put your choice in, then hit OK, then it'll be confirmed. But now if you hit 1, just 1 will be on the screen and it will stay on the screen. So I have to actually start the actual polling for it to be confirmed. So just as long as you press a button and there's something on your screen, it is actually working. But you have to wait till we start polling for it to be confirmed. And so I don't know if that helps. So just as long as you press a button, if you hit 1 and 1's on the screen, it is working.
All right, we couldn't understand that up here. Did you understand it? All right, you're ahead of me. All right. There will be once you plug something in, put OK, there'll be the keypad will confirm the vote by displaying OK. So it's like you say OK, it says OK. And then you'll go to the next one and do the same, just as I described. Ready to go? Can we go to the next slide? Yes, over here. Microphone 2.
Okay. Lois Nemeth from Olympia Fields, United Methodist Church. On the voting, it seems pretty simple on it. As long as we have this device notified at the time of polling to enter that particular number and then press OK and share it during the time of voting. The question that I have, I know that we have the delegate nominee list with the numbers for clergy and laity. These are two separate lists. Will there be enough for everyone to share and, of course, verify who is voting for who? Is clergy only voting for clergy? And is laity only voting for laity?
Yes. So there will be a time when I ask for laity to vote, and laity only will vote for laity. You cannot vote for clergy. You can only vote for laity. So make sure you have your numbers that you want to vote for now, and write them down so that you're ready to go. And then I will call on the clergy to vote. And only clergy who are eligible, which I will remind you, and all of you should have received notification about your eligibility, then you will vote for clergy. Only clergy, vote for clergy. Yes. Microphone 4.
Carolyn Lukasik, Ottawa, Epworth. Is there a list of, there's a list on our table of laity and their laity delegates and their numbers. There is not a list of clergy delegates and their numbers at our table. Okay,
It's
thank
a
you.
yellow list. It was also online. Again, quick find your numbers. This will be key. Okay, please let me finish with the, do you have a device issue? Microphone 5.
Yes, I do. The instructions that were given is if you enter number 1, you'll see number 1 on the screen. But a number of us have devices that don't show anything. The display is blank. But how come there's some people are seeing numbers and we're not? The instruction that was given over the mic said that if
the devices aren't properly, the devices aren't on yet.
There's a whole bunch of us that don't have. So someone said we need new batteries. So could we ask people to raise their hands if their device doesn't show any numbers?
All right. All right. You can't, you can only vote for the number of people that we're voting for. If you vote for more than the number we're voting for, initially we vote for 3, but if you happen to vote for 4, only your first 3 will be counted. Okay? Next slide. If you enter the wrong number or the number of a candidate, next slide. And how do they know it's working? Okay, so if your device is not working, please raise your hand. All right, so they'll be looking over there. Can you go on to the next slide while we're doing this? So if you entered the wrong number or a number of a candidate who already been elected, which we haven't done yet, or removed, that number will not be recorded or counted, and you will still have that vote available. However, if you do not provide enough votes, that vote will be invalid. So be sure to keep proper account of which candidates you are electing and the number of candidates we need to elect. All right? Yeah. Okay, so let me tell you while I have nothing on the screen here. Some of you walked in without registering. That's why we have particularly more clergy at tables than we anticipated. So, I will be gracious, but you must be honest. So, laity, when it comes time to vote, I think it's predominantly clergy, right? Laity, maybe from another table, will need to give their device to a clergy person who doesn't have it, so that everybody can vote. That's what we want, right? So, you know, what I think might be a good thing is that you have partners. How about that? So, you know, right now, you just identify a lay person and a clergy person who will share their device most of the time. Over here, we still have some frantic waving. Frantic waving. All right, I think you should have been able to do that. I want to go back to who is eligible to vote. You were sent information according to the discipline. Local pastors are eligible to vote on general business of annual conference, including resolutions. But some local pastors are eligible to vote in the election of delegates to general and jurisdictional conference. Local pastors serving on the board of ordained ministry are eligible to vote on matters of ordination. All that we did at clergy session. Local pastors are eligible to attend local session, but local pastors are not eligible to vote. Oh, well, that doesn't count. See, I thought somebody else was doing this part. Local pastors are eligible to vote for delegates if they've served 2 consecutive years, full-time or part-time, immediately preceding the election, including the 2017 to 2018 and the 2018 to 2019 conference years, during which time no withdrawal of the appointment status has occurred, and they have additionally obtained their MDiv degree or completed the course of study. You were sent a letter about your eligibility. Local pastors are not eligible to vote for delegates if they have not served these 2 consecutive years and they have not obtained their MDiv degree. I'm sorry that I didn't have that a little smoother. All right. Okay, so what happens is, as long as you put a number in the screen and it shows up, it's working. If you would go to the AV booth if you think your machine is dead. Go to the booth, and I think we can deal with it faster. Okay. How are we doing with these PowerPoints? Can we keep going? All right, I think we're working this out a little bit. You have your partners, right? Can we have the PowerPoint back so that we can keep moving? Oh, that was the last one? I thought there was... Oh, guess what? There's a computer malfunction back there. All right. I am going to make an executive decision here. Oh, oops. Do you really think, okay, if we're back, we'll proceed. How do we do a test vote? Oh, they're busy taking care of the dead machines. Usually once we work these things out at the beginning, then it goes a whole lot easier. A question over here at 2. 2.
Thank you, Bishop. Jim Bell, clergy serving at Belvedere First. In the dead space, I'd like to move that we table the voting for delegates until we have acted on legislation 700.01 and .06. If I get a second, I'll speak to it.
Is there a second?
Bishop, the 2 items in question discuss the Northern Illinois Conference essentially leaving the United Methodist Church and withholding a majority of apportionment payments to the United Methodist Church. It seems to me that the resolution of those questions might affect who we would choose to serve as our delegates to jurisdictional and general conferences. Moreover, all the legislation properly before us, well and honorably submitted, it would seem that we might consistently say that we have received the results of special session, we've received the results of jurisdictional conference, we disagree with those things, we choose to leave the denomination, we choose not to pay apportionment support, and we choose not to send a delegation to jurisdictional or general conference. Or it might be that we would choose to select delegates based on those responses.
All right. Anybody else wish to speak to this? All right, then are you ready to vote? You got it. There were 2 resolutions. I don't have those numbers. 700.01 and 06. Is that correct? All right. You ready to vote? All those in favor, please say yes. Those who would not, say no. No. Oh, well, let's use our arms. All those in favor of delaying our voting until after we've dealt with these 2 pieces of legislation, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those who would not, please raise your hand. All right, and it does not prevail. All right. Okay. We're going to move on for a minute while some of these things get worked out. I'm going to go on with the Episcopal address, and if those who are assisting me would please come to the stage, I would appreciate it. And then hopefully by the time we finish with that, we'll be able to go on to take our first vote. Okay? Please come on up. Back to the future. Who do we want to be? Listen to these words from Philippians chapter 3, verses 14 through 21 from the Message. I've got my eye on the goal where God is beckoning us onward to Jesus. I'm off and running, and I'm not turning back. So let's keep focused on that goal, those of us who want everything God has for us. If any of you have something else in mind, something less than total commitment, God will clear your blurred vision. You'll see it yet. Now that we're on the right track, let's stay on it. Stick with me, friends. Keep track of those you see running the same course, headed for the same goal. There are many out there taking other paths, choosing other goals, and trying to get you to go along with them. Our Savior, the Master, Jesus Christ, he'll make us beautiful and whole with the same powerful skill by which he is putting everything as it should be, under and around him. Some of you may remember the movie Back to the Future, a science fiction film from 1985 starring Michael J. Fox, who played Marty McFly. The year is 1985, and his parents are unhappy, as is young Marty. His father is bullied by his boss. His mother is overweight, depressed, and alcoholic. His life is miserable. Marty meets an eccentric inventor who built a time machine out of a modified DeLorean car. Stuff happens, and Marty accidentally sends himself back to 1955, where he meets his future parents and ultimately gets them together. His efforts change history so that when he is finally returned to 1985, after many misadventures, of course, his parents are successful, fit, and happy, and everyone lives happily ever after, until the sequel. The movie Back to the Future fixes the past so that the present is made perfect. Maybe many of us here in the church and in society, as well as in our personal lives, think it might be a great thing to be able to fix the past so that the present and even the future will be better than it seems from this vantage point. So much has happened since we gathered last year at annual conference. Uncertainty about who we will be as an annual conference and even a denomination continue to hang over us. Short of a time machine, particularly an ecclesiological time machine, we can't fix the past. But we can reclaim our future when we understand our history so as to be clear about who we are and want to be as followers of Jesus. The image that we have for this annual conference isn't that of DeLorean car, so emblematic of the movie Back to the Future, but the West African Sankofa. The Sankofa is a mythic bird from the tribe in Ghana. It literally means to return to the past, to look, seek, and fetch that which is of risk of being left behind. The Sankofa flies forward into the future while looking backward at who it has been in the past, with an egg in its mouth, symbolizing that future of potential. We often have to go back to the place where we lost our way or our identity in order to regain and fetch who we have been at our best. Then we can go forward, knowing who we are. I think the Sankofa is a beautiful image of what our task is at this point in history in the Northern Illinois Annual Conference and that of the United Methodist Church. And this is a perfect year for us as an annual conference to look back in order to fly forward. It's a year of anniversaries. Tomorrow, we will celebrate 200 years of mission in the Methodist tradition, as well as 50 years of Black Methodists for church renewal. We will also celebrate 150 years of women's mission in the Methodist tradition. And I'm pleased to have Harriet Olson, the General Secretary of the United Methodist Women, lead us in biblical and historical study of the mission of women tonight and again tomorrow morning. And last but not at all least, it is the 180th anniversary of continuous ministry in the Northern Illinois area of the United Methodist Church and its antecedent bodies. Yes. So I've asked a few people to share some of the themes of our identity and work as an annual conference over the years. It's not a comprehensive history, it's a thematic history. And I hope that these themes will inform us in our conversations and legislation at this annual conference. Let's look back for a few minutes to remember who we've been in order to fly forward.
The Northern Illinois Conference is celebrating 180 years of continuous ministry. In 1803, the Methodist missionary Benjamin Young was appointed to the Illinois area as part of what we call the Western Conference. Circuits were established as settlements popped up across the prairies. Jesse Walker, who has also been called the father of Illinois Methodism, was appointed to the Illinois Circuit in 1806. The Illinois Territory began to grow in population, especially in areas like Sterling, Dixon, Ottawa, Joliet, Plainfield, Des Plaines, and Freeport. The first regular appointment was John Dew to the Galena Mission in 1828. Walker organized a class meeting in Plainfield in 1829. A church was built in Princeton in 1839. The church in Dixon was started by a laywoman, Amanda Talmadge, in 1836, when she and two other women, one Presbyterian, the other Baptist, started and maintained religious services until a circuit rider was appointed. Methodist laity and local preachers were instrumental in organizing churches. The Methodist Protestant Church, the Evangelical Association Church, and the United Brethren Church all began to organize by the end of 1839 and into 1840. By the time the Rock River Conference was established in Mount Morris by Bishop Beverly Walt on August 26, 1840, where there were already 26 charges and 7 known church buildings within its bounds. Throughout this period of time, the focus of the clergy, circuits, and churches was to strengthen the existing charges and establish new circuits. Today, we will call them faith communities. This focus continues to be our conference priority 180 years later. The methods may have changed drastically over the years, but the gospel imperative remains the same.
Settlers who came from the East Coast and Europe desired to reach out to the Native Americans in the area. Jesse Walker, who began to preach and organize a church in the early 1800s, was appointed as a missionary to the Potawatomi Indians in 1825. It's always important to remember that most settlements, and therefore churches, were established only after Black Hawk and his people were pushed across the Mississippi River. The Ho-Chunk, Potawatomi, and Kikpu nations followed. In 1835, the Illinois Potawatomi began their trail of death to Kansas from the gates of Fort Dearborn in today's downtown Chicago. Settlers took over the sacred lands of indigenous peoples. The original boundaries of the Rock River Conference included all of Wisconsin, Upper Michigan, and portions of Minnesota. These areas were homelands of the Ojibwa and Ottawa peoples. 2 preachers in the early years of the Methodist Church in Illinois were Kagigagabao, known as George Copway, a member of the Mississauga Ojibwa Nation, and his cousin Pataquahong, known as Henry P. Chase. At 22 years old, Copway was already a deacon, and Henry Chase was ordained at the 1840 Rock River Conference. Both preachers were both well known at the time in intellectual and literary circles as well as in the church. The Civil War was a troubled time for both the nation and our church. While support for the Civil War was strong in Illinois and most held anti-slavery sentiments, leadership in the country and in the church was also anti-Indian. Much like the wider Methodist Wesleyan history overall, there was a desire to reach out to Native American peoples, but attitudes and methods often caused more harm than good. As a denomination in 2012 and also as an annual conference in 2015, we as an annual conference have carried out acts of repentance for our past actions.
In 1939, the Methodist Protestant Church, the Methodist Episcopal Church, and the Methodist Episcopal Church South, which had split off in the 19th century over slavery, came back together. In doing so, the Methodist Church was created with 5 geographical jurisdictions across the United States, plus a central jurisdiction, which was a segregated place for Black Methodists following the merger. But segregation in the Methodist Church had roots established well before that date. One of the conferences in the central jurisdiction was the Lexington Conference, which included Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. The Chicago district of the Lexington Conference began to be organized as early as 1869 as a separate conference and had 12 churches by the 1920s. St. Mark United Methodist Church in Chicago was organized in 1893 within the Lexington Conference, which became a mother church to other Black churches in Chicagoland. The churches, clergy, conferences, and bishops existed within the Methodist Church, but always at the whim and authority of the Methodist Church/White Conference and its bishops. In 1956, the General Conference approved the 9th Amendment of its Constitution to provide for the dissolution of the central jurisdiction. In 1964, the General Conference approved legislation that permitted the Lexington Conference of the central jurisdiction to merge with the North Central jurisdiction. This was one of the first mergers of the central jurisdiction into the geographical jurisdictional conferences. All 14 churches and 15 pastors within the bounds of the Rock River Conference became a part of the North Central jurisdiction, but full inclusion took many more years, even as we continue to face racism within our church and society today. However, the Rock River Conference strongly declared their commitment to be inclusive, demonstrating that commitment by bringing forth members of the Lexington Conference into the cabinet. The process to dissolve the central jurisdiction took from 1956 until 1972, 16 years. To complete throughout General Church, the former Evangelical United Brethren Church is credited with insisting upon their 1968 merger with the Methodist Church to bring about the total dissolution of the central jurisdiction. In December 1969, a special called session of the NIC recognized the Black Caucus as a program area, challenging the annual conference to encourage self-determination, self-empowerment, and leadership opportunities within the NIC, as well as to develop and to strengthen the Black church in Chicago. This was an effort to challenge NIC to respond to the urban crisis exploding all around us. A statement noted the sin of our age and the consequences judgments upon the UMC is endemic and systemic racism. The Black Caucus came to be known as Black Methodists for Church Renewal, or BMCR. Today, we celebrate 50 years of BMCR's work in the Northern Illinois Conference. Intentional work. Intentional work and ministry to eliminate racism in the church and society needs to continue to be our priority. We will hear more about this when the annual conference shepherding team presents its major goals. Anti-racism efforts require consistent and constant work. Moving into civil rights era, there were a number of white Methodist clergy in the South who were told by their bishops that they need to head north because of their racial views, which were anti-segregation / pro-integration. At that time, a number of Methodist clergy came from the South to NIC, although the exact count is unknown. Some Rock River clergy were active in efforts to desegregate white Southern Methodist churches, such as Reverend Jerry Forshey and Joe Buckles. Later, in the civil rights years of the 1960s, the social justice commitment of many churches and clergy in the NIC became strong. A renewed understanding and articulation of social holiness and personal holiness began to emerge.
After the Northern Central Jurisdiction meeting following the merger of the Evangelical United Brethren and Methodist Church, the Northern Illinois Conference was officially created by name on June 28, 1968. It met for its first session as a uniting conference on September 21, 1968. The United Methodists, as well as the Rock River Conference, is a story of merger and change. As our culture and church change, mergers have brought us together after separation over racial, cultural, and theological differences.
The NIC area has been an immigration destination since the early 19th century and continues to be today. In 1852, the General Conference assigned 2 German districts from Iowa and Wisconsin to the Rock River Conference, which brought 20 German-speaking preachers into the fold, as well as 300 members. A Swedish mission was established in Chicago with at least 50 members. German, Norwegian, and Danish churches were formed into conferences around their shared language in the Rock River Conference area. In 1933, there began a gradual merger of all the language conferences, German, Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian. This process was completed by 1943. Other immigrant and language ministries have flourished in the Rock River/NIC. One is the Korean Church. After the second wave of Korean immigrants to the United States following the formal Japanese occupation of the Korean Peninsula in 1910, immigrants began moving from Hawaii to San Francisco and then Chicago. In September of 1923, Reverend Chang Young Kim, who had studied at Garrett Theological Seminary, held the NIC's first Korean language worship service with 6 members. First Korean UMC was the first Korean church in Chicagoland and the first Korean church in the Midwest. This 96-year-old church grew from 6 worshipers to hundreds. Today, there are over 60,000 Koreans in the Chicagoland area, and the NIC is home to 12 Korean churches. Until around 1920, most Hispanic Latinx Americans resided in the southwestern United States, but they began moving toward the Midwest looking for jobs. and Mexican Americans began to settle in the Chicago area. During World War II in the 1950s, more came to the Chicago area from Puerto Rico. By 2017, the Hispanic population of Chicago alone grew to 800,000, with about 2 million in the state of Illinois. Charles A. Parkin began NIC's first Hispanic ministry in the 1920s with primary outreach to Mexican immigrants. By 1926, an Italian Methodist church named Good Shepherd became a Hispanic ministry. By the mid-1950s, 2 Hispanic youth answered the call to ministry, sought seminary training, and pastored churches, Jose Velasquez and Fines Flores. There are currently 24 Hispanic Latinx ministries, congregations in the NIC. The conference has 2 Hispanic Latinx deacons, 10 elders, and 12 licensed local pastors. With the help of the National Hispanic Latinx Plan of the UMC, of which NIC has provided leadership, United Methodists have placed a renewed emphasis on being a multicultural church family that is God-centered, values all people, and is a vital part of the life of the community by sharing God's love. We have focused on working in the areas of lay, clergy, and youth leadership. Our conference has been a front-runner in providing Hispanic church leadership through the Conference Academy for Faith Community Development, which is a 2-year program for pastors and laypersons who feel called to start a new thing within the NIC Hispanic/Latinx community. Following the UMC's Book of Resolutions and Social Principles, the NIC has supported Sanctuary in Northern Illinois Conference, and 2 churches have declared themselves to be sanctuary churches. Then, as now, growth often comes through immigrant communities in language ministries other than English, including Korean, Spanish, Hindi, Urdu, Telugu, Gujarati, and Tagalog. Our history of ethnic and gender diversity includes the nurturing of leadership to the general church. NIC has produced 3 African American bishops, Charles Jordan, 1992, Jonathan Keaton, 1996, and Tracy Smith Malone, 2016. Over the years, the NIC has had 1 ethnic bishop, Hee Sung Young, 2004-2012, and 1 woman bishop, Sally Dick, who came in 2012.
From the very beginning of our history, the Northern Illinois Conference has stood for social change. For instance, slavery divided the people called Methodist. In the 1845, this conference took a firm stance against slavery, despite many objections, and sent an official declaration of its stance to the General Conference in the 1850s, prior to the Civil War. While generally sympathetic to the abolition of slavery, not all people agreed with abolition, and it created tensions and even some membership loss. Following the Civil War, the Methodist Church in the NIC area focused on providing care for those who had been enslaved people. In addition to stands against slavery and racism and for civil rights, the NIC has stood with LGBTQIA persons through official statements, legislation, and action to become reconciling. In the early 1970s, some NIC congregations began wrestling with human sexuality in the church when the Book of Discipline declared that, in quotes, homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, end quote. In 1982, the nationally based Reconciling Congregation program organized, working to welcome, affirm, and encourage the full participation of gay and lesbians in church life at all levels. In 1984, Whedon United Methodist Church in Evanston became the first reconciling church in our conference. Now there are 59 of our congregations in the Reconciling Ministries Network, which NIC voted to join itself in 1986. Again, local church, conference, and general conference legislation and action to move the church toward full inclusion of all people has been a constant, even as it has, at times, created disagreements.
The Northern Illinois Church Conference and its antecedents were instrumental in gender justice. Women from Northern Illinois were influential in moving the general church in its attitudes and acceptance of women in the church, ministry, and mission. Ms. Jenny Fowler Willing was a pastor's wife in the Rockford area who heard the need for women missionaries in 1869. Through her dedicated efforts, Illinois sent a number of women into the mission field during the 19th century as part of the Women's Foreign Missionary Society, strengthening women's leadership as well as missionary endeavors. Ms. Frances Willard, known as the founder of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, sought to improve the social conditions of families in the late 1800s regarding substance abuse. She was a strong advocate for women's education and suffrage in our nation, as well as the full participation of women in the church. In 1888, women wanted to be ordained and hold various decision-making positions within the Methodist Church. Frances Willard was one of the 5 women elected lay delegates to the 1888 General Conference. Although she was not seated, she helped pave the way for the future. But consider that the Rock River Conference voted for her to go as one of their lay delegates, even though they knew there was a good chance she wouldn't be seated. This was groundbreaking for women in the Methodist Church. Lucy Ryder Meyer was the founder of the Deaconess Movement, which is credited for developing the leadership and education of women in general, as well as biblical and theological education through the Chicago Training School, eventually affiliated with Garrett Theological Seminary. Through the Deaconess Movement, Lucy Ryder Meyer is credited with building Wesley Hospital, a children's home, a senior citizens home, a retired deaconess's home, several boarding schools, and a baby fold. As historian J. Gordon Melton writes in his book Log Cabins to Steeples, every single benevolent institution brought by the Rock River Conference to the United Methodist Church was a successful project of Lucy Ryder Meyer. These early contributions by women to the Rock River and General Conference undoubtedly imprinted upon the Northern Illinois Conference a commitment to gender equality, as well as health and welfare institutions to care for the most vulnerable in our communities. Organizations like ChildServe and Rosecrans continue to be an important outreach to the most vulnerable in our communities across the NIC. Of course, the foresight and philanthropy of Mrs. Eliza Clark Garrett enabled Mrs. Garrett's vision for a school to train ministers. Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary stands in her honor, educating countless church leaders since its inception in 1848. Still desiring the ordination of women elders, it was the Women's Missionary Society that took up the cause and formed a committee on the status of women in 1944. Lay women were strong advocates for the full voice, vote, and rights of women as clergy. The General Conference voted for full ordination rights for women in 1956. Before 1956, the Rock River Conference had experienced women in the pulpit, but not as elders with full clergy rights. The Church of the United Brethren in Christ had been ordaining women since 1896, but when it merged with the Evangelical Church to become the EUB Church, the ordination rights of women were rescinded. Like most change, the ordination of women came with uncertainty and struggle as well as celebration. Even though women in the General Conference had full rights of ordination, there was still resistance, as there is yet today in places, to ordain and appoint women, and many bishops were reluctant to take the lead. Laywomen such as Phyllis Tholen sponsored legislation during the 1974 annual conference, encouraging the appointment of women elders. From the election of Frances Willard to General Conference to the granting of full clergy rights to Constance Hassentab Elms in the Rock River Conference and Barbara McEwing in the Lexington Conference, the Methodist EUB family in Northern Illinois has recognized God's call for women's full participation in the organizational life of the church.
This brief history can't possibly tell the entire story or lift the names of the Northern Illinois Conference people, clergy, and laity, or raise all the themes of the Northern Illinois Conference over the last 180 years. The gospel remains the same, but over the last 180 years, just about everything else has changed. More than anything, we hope that this brief history will nurture resilience in these uncertain times in our church and in our society. As we have gone back into our history and plucked a few themes of change from our past, we do so to inspire us all in faith, hope, and love.
Northern Illinois, that's who you have been. Yes. And thank you for helping to share our story. Studies indicate that if leaders spend time looking back at their history, what made them who they are, they do a better job of looking forward into the future. In fact, looking back always allows an organization to look further ahead than if you don't consider who you've been. As you heard, we've been and are an annual conference who sought to be more inclusive of others, often ahead of what was happening in the church at large. We have not done all these things perfectly. At times, this conference is rushed out there with enthusiasm, without a sensitivity to what is needed in a more diverse and inclusive church. We've had to grow in our cultural competence related to others. We have hurt others and have been hurt ourselves. Lord, have mercy upon us. But I have to give it to you. At least even in our blunders, we have sought to love kindness, do justice, and most of the time, walk humbly with our God. So this will be yet another critical year in the life of this annual conference and the denomination. And the question that we need to ask over and over again is, who will we be? Over the last few months, we've had gatherings where we learned about the outcomes of General Conference 2019, and I hope that you have followed them. And then the Judicial Council decisions, which I've written in articles and letters and given videos. But even if the Judicial Council had declared the whole traditional plan to be unconstitutional, it would not have been just a reset at where we were in 2016. Something significantly shifted when the traditional plan was approved. As I've said before, I want to say again, it wasn't just the affirmation of traditional marriage, that is a man and a woman. It was the punitive and untraditional penalties toward those of us who differ with equally and deeply held beliefs based on scripture, reason, tradition, and experience around human sexuality. The message from General Conference 2019 was loudly proclaimed and well articulated by Bill Lawrence, a professor of American Church history at Southern Methodist University's Perkins School of Theology, and a former member of the Judicial Council. He said in a blog, "What the 2019 General Conference reiterated and reinforced is that homosexual persons are welcome to sit in our pews, serve on our committees, sing in our choirs, share our sacraments, supply funds for our activities, sup at our church dinners, schmooze with our visitors, and spend time in our mission projects. But they are not welcome to speak in our pulpits, celebrate our sacraments, stand at our altars to be united in Christian marriage, or say that God is calling them into ordained ministry. Until now, we have lived as a church under one tent, albeit not without tension. But we've kind of been like a family on a camping trip in one tent, shouting and struggling at times. But nevertheless, when the rain pours and the bears circle, we've always managed to come together as a church in mission and outreach. As I've always said, if you're a conservative church, be a fruitful conservative church. If you're a progressive church, be a progressive and fruitful church. We need more points of entry into a message and community of Christ's love and grace, not fewer. At the recent Council of Bishops meeting, the predominant conversation was about how the United Methodist Church under the traditional plan is untenable and unsustainable. Advocates for the traditional plan, as well as those who had hoped for other options like the One Church plan or the Simple plan, agree that we may need an amicable separation to find a new form of unity. If there are two sides, then both sides agree that we can no longer afford to continue to do harm to each other in regards to human sexuality. As you may know, there are all kinds of conversations going on throughout the United States and the central conferences about developing a new form of unity, which is based on our roots of Methodism, but not linked in polity, or at least polity related to human sexuality. There are other conversations about how to stay and resist. Persons from Northern Illinois have been a part of all of these conversations. And we have a piece of legislation before us, hopefully today, that will empower us to be apprised and participating in what is developing across the connection so that we can fully participate in a future with hope. At this point, this is my personal vision of what I hope happens, my personal vision, that there be some form of affiliation, a plan of affiliation. For instance, an annual conference would decide if it wanted to affiliate as a United Methodist Church under the traditional plan, or, for instance, maybe another affiliation like the Simple Plan. If an individual local church in that annual conference didn't want to be in affiliation with what that annual conference decided, it could join another annual conference, which affiliated another way. But conversations are only beginning, and there are no proposals. As we discern the future together, another question is raised: how will we be with each other? This is of critical importance. How we are with each other says as much about who we are as anything else. Some of us will resist the traditional plan, and others will want to insist that it's fully enforced. Since once again it does not appear what we shall be, I encourage us to allow everyone to get to the future intact. Let's not be a police state where colleagues and parishioners grow in distrust of each other. This only serves to diminish our witness and mission. Let's not unduly provoke one another, but instead let us do no harm. And as it says in Hebrews 10, verse 24, let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds. So given our history as an annual conference, who will we be? You will find several pieces of legislation that we address today and tomorrow that will afford some conversations about that. Will we seek to live within the United Methodist Church under the traditional plan, resist its outcomes, or work with others in finding another way forward? Your conversations and decisions will mark the journey ahead. In addition to these conversations, we will be determining who we will be in the future by the election of our delegates to General Conference 2020. I urge you to vote for people who have a wide knowledge of how the general church works, not just a single issue. Big decisions will be made at General Conference 2020, and we need to have the very best delegation, which will work long and hard, as this past one has, networking and partnering with others, since we are a small conference. We need delegates who can influence others and build coalitions for a future with hope. So there's much to do this year as an annual conference, but in the meantime, there are people who need us to be in ministry and mission. Some of them care about our stance on human sexuality, but many don't, especially those who are hungry and homeless and flooded or burned out of their homes, or dying from preventable diseases, addiction, or suffering from incarceration, violence, warfare, or gun violence. We cannot take our eyes off the goal of caring for our neighbor. Recently, I read a book entitled Alienated in America: Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse by Timothy P. Carney. The author repeatedly and specifically cites that local churches in communities of all kinds are critical to the health and well-being of the communities. Now, mind you, this is not a religious or church consultant book. It's written by a journalist who is analyzing our American culture, socially, economically, and politically. But he maintains that not enough focus is placed on strengthening local churches in these communities that are struggling, because it's actually these churches that are an essential major hub of social networks. Instead, all the focus tends to be on strengthening local economies and increasing jobs. It needs to be both, he maintains. Obviously, the real estate itself of the church isn't what matters, but the impact of that church on the community is what matters. The local church and the health of the community are closely tied. So we need to make sure that we have strong and vital churches in all our communities. Yes, we have a mission to fulfill. So one other piece of legislation will be presented today, which focuses on strengthening our local churches. The annual conference shepherding team has been organized this year and is bringing 3 strategic goals that is identified and which it has identified as essential in making vital congregations that impact vital communities. The first goal is that all local churches need to develop new ways to help members grow in their own discipleship, practicing the spiritual disciplines of our faith and sharing that faith with others. We can't have vital churches that impact vital communities if we don't have vital Christians. You can't just have a vital church. We need vital Christians who are growing in their faith, able to articulate that faith and seek to live as followers of Jesus in these challenging times. A second strategic goal is to live into the conviction that racism is truly that which is incompatible with Christian teaching. How are we as followers of Jesus repenting of and turning from racism, which has been called by some the original sin of America? How are we spreading scriptural holiness across the land as John Wesley commissioned us to do, specifically in the communities where we live? His definition of spreading scriptural holiness was to grow in love of God and our neighbor, no matter who that neighbor is. The third strategic goal addresses our capacity and sustainability as local churches and an annual conference. Friends, our financial capacity and sustainability as an annual conference is vulnerable, starting with many of our local churches. How do we strengthen our local churches in this way? All of these strategic goals, if embraced by all the local churches, with the help and resourcing of district and annual conference shepherding teams, will make us strong and vital Christians with strong and vital congregations that make us a strong and vital annual conference. There is no magic pill that does this work. It's the work of every United Methodist disciple and every local church. Furthermore, this is not the time to weaken our local churches or the annual conference in our response to General Conference 2019. In our strength, we have more options as the denomination itself continues to find a way forward into a preferred future. We have much to do this year. As all this and more will be going on in this transitional year, I encourage you to stay abreast to what is happening through the Northern Illinois Conference and United Methodist News Service reports. I will continue to issue pastoral statements and videos, and we will undoubtedly have gatherings to discuss who we want to be, including at our special annual conference session in the fall on November 16. Finally, this year will be a transitional in other ways. When Marva Andrews and I are just about finished with our work at the end of the day, one of us will inevitably say, well, I've had just about as much fun as I can today. And of course we mean we're packing up and going home. Well, I want to say that in 2020, I will have 41 years of active ministry, serving in 3 annual conferences as a pastor, a district superintendent, or a bishop. While I've never strayed far from I-90, I've seen many faces of the church in urban, rural, and suburban communities. While I've seen some heartbreaking stains upon the witness of Christ in the world, more often than not, I have seen the best of God's people at work in the world. My own world has been expanded by all I have encountered and had the privilege to serve, including you. Oh, the places I've gone and the people I have met, thanks be to God. But as of September 1, 2020, I will have had all the fun I can take. And I will be retiring to beautiful, sunny California, far, far away from I-90. But I just want to remind you, I will be here for a whole nother annual conference year. You're not done with me yet. So as I said, we've got a lot of work to do. So let's stay focused on who we are with our eyes on the goal where God is beckoning us on. Amen. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. My privilege to serve. So in addition to that short stretch break, which I appreciate, I'm going to give you a 10-minute break. And then, honestly, we need to begin to take votes. So I think we're ready to go. If you have any problems, do you have an announcement, Debbie?